My brother stole my inheritance after I supported him through college. Now he's rich, but I had a plan that left him completely powerless. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I've been the responsible older brother who cleaned up every mess my sibling made. It wasn't a choice at first, it just kind of became my role. While I was working my mid-level tech job, grinding through deadlines and endless emails, I was also footing half the bills at home, making sure Nathan didn't drown in his own irresponsibility. The worst part? No one ever really asked me to do it, they just expected it, and somehow, I wanted to be the guy who kept the family afloat. Nathan, on the other hand, had this effortless charm that made everyone forgive him instantly. He'd quit jobs on a whim, spend weekends at parties or on trips I couldn't afford, and somehow, he always had an excuse ready. I'm figuring things out, bro, he'd shrug, leaning back on my couch with that stupid grin that somehow made me believe him. And of course, my parents ate it up. Every time I'd scold him, they'd sigh and say, "You're so responsible, thank God we have you," while Nathan walked away unscathed. It hurt in ways I didn't admit to anyone, watching him skate through life while I paid for it all, smiling and nodding while quietly seething. Even my friends tried to warn me. "Dude, he's taking advantage," they'd say over beers, shaking their heads at some story Nathan had spun. But I waved them off. Family loyalty was everything to me, and I genuinely believed helping Nathan was helping both of us. So, when the chance came to help him secure college tuition, I didn't hesitate. I worked extra hours, rearranged my budget, and made calls I had no time for, all to ensure Nathan could start school without worry. I felt proud, almost heroic, sitting at my desk that night, finalizing the payments, thinking I was building a future for both of us. What I didn't know then was that this would be the beginning of a path where loyalty would cost me far more than I ever imagined, and Nathan had plans I wasn't even close to seeing. I thought sending Nathan off to college would be a turning point, a chance for him to grow up and finally start taking responsibility. I covered tuition, textbooks, rent, even groceries some months, while juggling my own bills and overtime shifts. I told myself it was an investment in both our futures, me, the dependable older brother, and him, the charming kid with potential everyone else seemed blind to. But the first semester was a wake-up call I didn't want to admit. Nathan thrived in ways I couldn't keep up with. Parties, trips, new gadgets, he was living a life I couldn't touch. And every time I asked how he was affording things beyond tuition, he laughed it off. "Relax, bro, I've got this covered," he'd say, flashing that same grin that somehow made me believe him. But deep down, I couldn't shake the creeping unease that something wasn't adding up. Friends didn't let me forget it either. "Man, he's milking you," my buddy Jason said one night over beers, pointing out how Nathan had casually mentioned a brand new laptop while I was crunching numbers to pay his rent. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. "He's just a kid," I said. "Everyone's exaggerating. I'm helping him because he's family." But the cracks were starting to show. Packages I didn't recognize kept arriving at his dorm, and he became defensive whenever I asked about money. "Don't worry about it, bro," he'd mutter, snapping his laptop shut or changing the subject with practiced ease. The nagging suspicion that I was funding more than just his education began to gnaw at me, but I buried it under pride. I told myself, this was temporary, just a rough patch, a few years until he found his footing. Sitting at my desk one late night, adding up my account after paying his tuition and rent, I felt a swell of pride. I was doing the right thing, I was building him a future. I had no idea that while I thought I was shaping his path, Nathan was quietly shaping his own plan, one that didn't include me. Graduation day should have been a victory for both of us, a moment I imagined we'd share with pride. Nathan walked across that stage with honors, smiling wide for the cameras, and I felt a twinge of satisfaction. I'd sacrificed time, money, and energy to make this happen. But as I watched him shake hands and accept accolades, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Something felt off, like I was celebrating someone else's life, not mine. The weeks after graduation only made it worse. Nathan landed a high-paying corporate role almost immediately, flaunting new clothes, gadgets, and weekend trips. Family and friends showered him with praise while I sat quietly, acknowledging the work I'd done behind the scenes. "He's really going places," my mom said, smiling at him while barely glancing at me. It stung in ways I didn't voice. Then came the first real shock, a bank notice slipped under my door. Nathan had legally claimed full ownership of the inheritance our parents had promised both of us. I read the papers 3 times, thinking it must be a mistake. But it wasn't. He'd maneuvered everything while I was working overtime to cover his living expenses and tuition. I confronted him the night I found out. "Nathan, what is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, my heart pounding. He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and shrugged. "I thought it was time I handled my own stuff." "Don't worry, bro, you'll be fine." That casual tone, that utter lack of acknowledgement, pierced me more than anything else could. I left his apartment feeling hollow. Pride, betrayal, and disbelief collided inside me. How could the kid I raised, literally, in so many ways, look me in the eye and take everything I had worked for without a second thought? I didn't know it yet, but this moment marked the real beginning of the fight. And deep down, I realized I couldn't rely on family loyalty anymore. Something had to change, or I'd be powerless forever. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan's smug grin, the way he leaned back like he'd just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. The next morning, I called him. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. When I arrived at his apartment, he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing mattered. "So, what's up?" he asked casually, as if I hadn't just discovered he'd taken everything we were supposed to share. I swallowed my anger and said, "I saw the inheritance papers. Care to explain why it's all in your name?" Nathan laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that makes your blood run cold. "Oh, that? I mean, I thought it made sense. You've always been the responsible one. I figured I'd handle things from here." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the audacity. My jaw ached from clenching it so tight, my stomach twisted. You knew I paid for everything. Tuition, rent, groceries. And you just," I trailed off, voice breaking. He shrugged again. "It's business, bro, don't take it personally." That casual dismissal, the lack of any remorse, felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand the years of sacrifice he'd trampled on. But all I did was leave, shutting the door behind me with a hollow thud. Outside, the air felt thick, oppressive, like the city itself was pressing in on me. My friends were right. I had been used. Walking home, I realized something terrifying: this wasn't just a betrayal. Nathan had fundamentally changed the power dynamic between us, and for the first time, I felt completely powerless. But even in that despair, a small flicker of resolve sparked inside me. If I didn't fight back, this wasn't just money lost, it was my dignity, my life, my future. And in that moment, I knew I had to plan. Carefully. Patiently. Ruthlessly. I hit rock bottom that week. I'd been working overtime, juggling bills, trying to stay afloat, and yet here I was watching Nathan flaunt the life I'd helped build for him. Every Instagram post, every brag about his new apartment or luxury car felt like a punch straight to my gut. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the smirk on his face, hearing his shrug, "Don't take it personally." Friends tried to console me. "Man, you've done enough. Cut him off, move on," they said. But moving on wasn't that simple. It never had been. I had invested years of my life, sweat, and money into Nathan, and now it felt like everything I had worked for was stolen. Worse, my parents acted like it was normal, subtly implying I was overreacting, that this was just how he was. The humiliation ate at me. I replayed every memory of helping him, covering his mistakes, and defending him to everyone who questioned his behavior. And the worst part? I realized that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough for him or for anyone else in my family. I was expendable. Invisible. One night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at the stacks of bills and empty bank statements, I felt something I hadn't in years: anger so sharp it almost hurt. Not blind anger, but the kind that burns slowly and carefully, the kind that forces you to think, how do I take back control? I realized something crucial: this wasn't just about money, it was about power, respect, and finally standing up for myself. I knew the path ahead would be long and meticulous, but in that despair, clarity struck. If I wanted justice, and I did, I couldn't rush. I had to watch, wait, and plan. Nathan may have thought he had one, but he had no idea what was coming. And in the silence of that night, I promised myself I would not be powerless forever. After hitting rock bottom, I knew I couldn't confront Nathan directly anymore. He was too arrogant, too careless, too convinced he'd already won. So I started watching. Studying. Noticing the little cracks in his perfect little world. I paid attention to how he managed his finances, the way he handled his employees at work, the people he trusted blindly. Every brag, every careless slip became a piece of a puzzle I was determined to solve. I started making subtle moves. Networking quietly with his colleagues, offering advice disguised as casual conversation, planting seeds of doubt in tiny, almost invisible ways. I watched him get frustrated over trivial things, overreact to small setbacks, and slowly, imperceptibly, his perfect confidence began to wobble. I felt a strange satisfaction in it, the quiet thrill of knowing the tables could turn, but only if I stayed patient. Even outside of work, I noticed his weaknesses. His arrogance made him overspend, his pride made him ignore advice, and his charm kept him surrounded by people too afraid to confront him. I began documenting everything: loans he didn't properly account for, minor ethical missteps at his job, and the way he flaunted his wealth like a shield. Each observation was a potential tool, a lever I could use when the time was right. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming power. About showing him that just because he had charisma and luck on his side didn't mean he could steamroll me forever. For the first time since graduation, I felt in control. Patient. Strategic. Calculating. And the best part? Nathan didn't suspect a thing. He strutted through life as usual, laughing, boasting, completely unaware that every careless move he made was a building block for my plan. I smiled to myself late one night, sitting at my desk with a notebook full of notes and observations. The path ahead was long, but it was mine. And when the time came, Nathan wouldn't see it coming. Just when I thought I had Nathan figured out, I stumbled on something I hadn't expected, something that flipped the entire game on its head. While casually reviewing some public filings related to his business ventures, I noticed a series of loans he'd taken out against his assets. At first, I thought it was a mistake. No way, right? But the more I dug, the clearer it became. Nathan's empire wasn't solid, it was built on borrowed money, overconfidence, and reckless assumptions. My stomach dropped. Everything he flaunted, his apartment, his luxury car, the lavish vacations, was propped up by debt he couldn't actually cover. The arrogance I had hated suddenly became his vulnerability. He wasn't invincible. He was a house of cards, and all I needed was one strategic push. I realized, in that instant, that I didn't have to claw back my inheritance with force or confrontation. Patience was my weapon, observation my armor. Every careless email, every unguarded conversation he had at work, every brag to friends or family, those were cracks in his foundation. I could use them to quietly dismantle everything he had built without him ever realizing who was pulling the strings. It was intoxicating, knowing that all those sleepless nights, all the years of sacrifice, were about to pay off in a way Nathan could never have predicted. I felt a mix of relief and adrenaline. I finally had leverage, and the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless older brother watching my life get stolen. Still, I couldn't let my excitement show. Every move had to be calculated, every interaction controlled. If I rushed, if I revealed even a hint of my plan, it could all collapse. Nathan might have wealth, charisma, and charm, but I had something he didn't: patience, strategy, and the knowledge of exactly how to bring him down. And so I waited, quietly, watching him stumble unknowingly closer to the moment I had been planning for years. The tables were set, and soon, everything would change. By this point, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had a short fuse, and I needed patience. I started subtle psychological tactics, small manipulations that would slowly destabilize Nathan without him realizing it. I'd casually mention to his colleagues things he'd said or done, planting tiny seeds of doubt. A wrong number here, a misinterpreted email there, all designed to make him second-guess himself. It wasn't about being cruel, it was about reclaiming the power he had stolen. Nathan's reactions were exactly what I expected. He grew defensive over minor mistakes, snapped at colleagues, and even started micromanaging projects he used to delegate with confidence. Friends and family began noticing changes in him, whispering about how stressed and unpredictable he had become. But no one suspected me. I kept my calm, my face neutral, my tone friendly. Every interaction was a layer of invisibility, letting him implode on his own arrogance. Even outside work, I could see the cracks widening. He overspent recklessly, ignored advice from people he used to trust, and his pride made him careless. I noted everything: his impulsive decisions, his little boasts about investments that weren't as secure as he claimed, and his reliance on people who had no loyalty but thought they could use him. Every flaw became a weapon in my hands. The most satisfying moments were the ones he didn't even notice. A subtle comment at a party that seeded doubt in a friend's mind, an anonymous tip about a minor legal oversight, things that made him stumble without realizing why. I was the invisible hand guiding the chaos, and it felt surreal to have that much control after years of feeling powerless. Late at night, I'd sit at my desk with a notebook full of observations, feeling a strange thrill. Nathan's arrogance was collapsing, and I had orchestrated it without confrontation, without anyone knowing. He thought he was still in control, but the real game had already shifted. He was playing my chessboard, and I had all the pieces. I realized I couldn't take Nathan down alone. He had charm, money, and people who were too intimidated to question him. So, I started quietly gathering allies, people who had insight into his business, colleagues who had quietly expressed frustrations, even a few financial advisors who knew he was playing a risky game. I approached them carefully, casually, never letting them suspect my ultimate goal. I framed it as curiosity, concern, or a shared desire to see things done right. Slowly, they became my network, my eyes and ears inside the world Nathan thought he controlled. I also started digging into his minor mistakes, the ones he didn't notice. Overlooked debts, misfiled documents, contracts with clauses he hadn't read properly, everything. I didn't need to attack directly, I just needed to know the weak points, and my allies helped me spot them faster. Nathan's arrogance blinded him, made him sloppy, and I made sure every slip was recorded, logged, and ready to be leveraged. Every day, I watched the subtle cracks grow. Nathan became increasingly paranoid, questioning his employees, double-checking accounts, lashing out at minor mistakes. Friends and family noticed the tension too, whispering about how unstable he'd become. The sense of satisfaction was almost tangible. I had orchestrated chaos, and it was playing out exactly as I predicted. Even in these moments, I stayed invisible. I never directly interfered with him, never hinted at my plan. Every misstep he made, every decision that put him in a vulnerable position, strengthened my position. The more confident he acted, the easier it became to see where to strike. Sitting at my desk late at night, I smiled quietly to myself. Nathan was climbing higher, flaunting wealth, charisma, success, but he had no idea he was being surrounded, outmaneuvered, and dismantled piece by piece. And the best part? When the time came, he wouldn't even know who had won. The day finally came when everything I'd been carefully building started to snap into place. I made my move quietly but decisively, blocking key accounts, reclaiming partial assets, and alerting the right people about Nathan's financial missteps. He had no idea I was behind it. I watched from the sidelines as his empire, the one he flaunted for everyone to see, began to wobble. Nathan panicked fast. Emails went unanswered, colleagues questioned his decisions, investors pulled back. The arrogance that had once made him untouchable turned into fear, hesitation, and rash decisions. Friends whispered about how quickly he was losing control, but no one knew it was me orchestrating it all. I stayed calm, neutral, invisible. The storm was his own doing, guided by the pieces I had placed over months. Family noticed the shift too. For the first time, they weren't praising Nathan. Instead, there were quiet glances, subtle comments, and awkward questions. And me? I remained steady, the responsible older brother who had quietly weathered it all. But now, I wasn't just weathering, I was steering. The thrill wasn't in watching him fall, it was in watching justice unfold naturally. Every mistake he had made, every corner he had cut, every moment of arrogance, it all came back to him. And I didn't have to lift a finger in anger, the chaos of his own making did it for me. The final piece of the shift was when Nathan confronted me. "How did this happen?" he demanded, voice shaking, eyes wide. I simply smiled, calm, unshaken. "I told you patience matters, Nathan. You just never learned it." And in that moment, the power that had been stolen from me for years returned. Nathan's wealth, his arrogance, his control, it was all exposed as fragile, temporary, and ultimately meaningless without foresight. I had waited, watched, and acted. The tables had turned completely. When Nathan finally confronted me, it wasn't anger I felt, it was clarity. He stormed into my apartment, eyes wild, voice cracking. "How did you do this? How did you take everything back?" he shouted, pacing like a caged animal. I leaned back in my chair, calm, collected. "Do you really want me to explain?" I asked softly, and that seemed to unsettle him even more. I laid it out slowly, deliberately, showing him every small misstep he'd made, every reckless loan, every mismanaged account. His arrogance, charm, and careless bravado, everything that had made him untouchable, crumbled under the weight of facts. "You think charm and luck make you invincible," I said, my voice steady, "but they don't. Actions have consequences, Nathan. You forgot that." He tried to argue, to blame me, to plead, but it didn't matter. I had spent years watching, waiting, and planning. Every misstep he'd ever made, every careless decision, I had turned into leverage, and now the truth was undeniable. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was just done being powerless. Family and friends watched silently, some shocked, some impressed. For the first time, I saw Nathan powerless, humiliated, and regretful in a way that words could not fix. And in that moment, the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, it all felt worth it. Not for money, not for revenge, but for justice, for recognition, for finally reclaiming my dignity. Nathan slumped in his chair, silent, and for the first time, I realized something vital. The most satisfying revenge isn't about rage or chaos, it's about strategy, patience, and letting the world witness the consequences of someone's own choices. I looked at him, calm, composed, finally in control. "This isn't about me winning," I said quietly. "It's about you learning what happens when you forget who really builds the foundation you stand on." And for once, Nathan had nothing left to say. Sitting alone weeks later, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The storm had passed, and the house of cards Nathan built was nothing more than memories of arrogance and recklessness. I spent hours reflecting on everything, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the sleepless nights I thought were meaningless. For the first time, I realized that what I had truly reclaimed wasn't money or status. It was my power, my dignity, and my sense of self. I didn't gloat, I didn't flaunt. There was no need. The most satisfying part of it all was watching Nathan face the consequences of his choices without me having to lift a hand in anger. He had been so convinced of his invincibility that he never noticed the quiet, patient force quietly dismantling his life. And in that dismantling, I found a strange sense of closure, not vengeance, but justice delivered with precision. Family dynamics shifted too. They finally recognized the value of my patience, my foresight, and the years I spent silently carrying responsibilities that weren't mine to bear. I didn't rub it in, I simply existed in my own strength, calm and composed, the older brother who had survived betrayal and walked out stronger. It was a lesson, not just for Nathan, but for everyone around us. Loyalty has limits, and patience paired with strategy can accomplish what brute force never could. I even began rebuilding my own life, investing in myself the same way I had invested in Nathan, but this time with boundaries, foresight, and self-respect. Each step forward was a reminder that empowerment doesn't come from defeating others, it comes from reclaiming yourself. And sometimes, late at night, when I think back to the chaos, I can't help but smile quietly. Not out of malice, but because I know this, the older brother who once felt powerless has finally risen. Nathan may have once stolen everything, but I took back the one thing that matters most, my life, my dignity, and the knowledge that I am in control. And for the first time in years, I feel truly free.